one of the things that's unique about what Uprising Theater Company does is that we partner with local organizations that are working on these issues. And I was so fascinated by kind of the epilogue to your book, where you talked about this other factory that was in the 90s. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that and what you found there?
Yeah, so basically what happened was when Catherine and Charlotte and so on decide that they're going to go after the company, there's a kind of bit of corporate infighting, and Joseph Kelly is booted out essentially, and he decides to set up a new dial painting company just down the road. It's literally like a couple of blocks away from where Radium Dial was, and Radium Dial went bust, but his company survived 4 decades. And unfortunately, just as obviously we know they were totally lax about safety standards, that lack of care, lack of concern continued throughout the rest of the time that the company operated there. So I found in the archives, decade after decade, there were safety standards, there were concerns raised about the fact that radioactive waste was being dumped in the men's toilets rather than being properly disposed of. There was a vent that discharged above the children's playground. The women still were kind of encouraged to, take the material home if they wanted to practice it. They were still covered in the waste when they left, even though they were wearing smocks. Those smocks covered with radioactive waste would be washed in the family laundry, and it was still just as unsafe. But no one stepped in until 1978. That was when it was closed down, and they found that the radiation levels were 1,666 times higher than was safe. So it is history repeating itself, and what makes it all the more tragic is it was repeating itself in the very same town, because of course those lax safety standards did lead to women getting ill in very similar ways than the original Radium girls experienced.
Yeah, it's so, we see that still corporations are prioritizing finances over the safety of their workers.
Yeah.
We've seen that across industries, and that's something that we're going to try and talk about in the midst of doing this show. How this is a historical piece, but this is not history. Like this.
Yeah, it's totally relevant, and all the even more timely than when I wrote it. Given there are there's a lot of chat about rolling back regulations. Is there too much red tape for businesses? Well, if it saves lives, then no.
Right.
And I think it's important to tell stories like you're doing in these Shining Lives, because it tells the kind of human story behind that red tape, behind those safety regulations. They're there because people died. People died for us so that we have safer working practices. And I think that's really important to remember, the human faces and stories and tragedies that are behind the legislation.
Yeah, and it's so great that these women are finally getting their due for the work. They gave up so much to fight the court case, and so to see them finally be remembered and named is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, and their legacy is extraordinary. It's extraordinary in terms of the workers' rights, in terms of the fact that legislation was changed because of their case, which protected not only other women but other workers. There's the legacy of safety standards in radioactive industries. Several people have written to me who've read the book, who they say either they or their sons or daughters work in a radioactive industry of some type. And they now wear those kind of radiation measure badges that measure how much radiation you're exposed to. All of that comes as a consequence of not only how the Radium girls suffered, but how the Radium girls spoke up about it. And they have saved millions of lives. There is no kind of other way to put it. Basically, they are incredible. And something that the play doesn't touch on, which is something I only discovered through my research, was their scientific legacy as well. Those dial painters who didn't die in the initial kind of waves of death because something the play doesn't, you watch the play and I think you imagine, oh, they must all have died,
Right.
before their 40th birthdays. That wasn't the case at all. Many of them lived for decades after that. Many of them lived with their poisoning, but they were still alive for decades. So they might have lost their teeth, they might get cancer, they might have an amputated limb, but they are still living. And while they lived, they voluntarily submitted to scientific tests so that we could better understand the effects of radiation on the human body. And so a lot of the knowledge that we have today is based on that altruistic action of the Radium girls in submitting to bone marrow biopsies, x-rays, being scanned and, having to fill in very intrusive kind of questionnaires and so on about their physical and mental health. They did that, and it was a gift to humanity. So we benefit in that way from them as well, which I don't think many people are aware of. I wasn't aware of it until I uncovered it in the files.
Yeah. Do you know what the health legacy is in these towns, like in Ottawa, a small town with that much radium in it? And even in the Radium Dial's families, what the family lineage, what do you know anything about the health effects?
Yeah, I mean, it's serious. The cancer rates in Ottawa are much higher than other towns in the area. You think they had 2 radium dial painting studios operating in the heart of that very small town. And when they closed the firms and knocked down the buildings, the waste wasn't properly disposed of. It was actually dumped all around town, including in the school football fields. So yes, there is a health legacy. One thing to say is before the Radium Dial building was knocked down, there was a meat locker plant that operated there. So people bought their meat that had been stored in a radioactive building.
Ugh.
And it's anecdotal, but Darlene, who is Peg Looney's niece, kind of said to me, she knew someone who got their meat there. 3 brothers got colon cancer within 6 months of each other, and wow. they all got their meat from that firm. And in terms of the effects on the women's children, it really seems to have varied. So there are certainly cases of women who could not conceive or who had miscarriages, stillbirths. Of those children who did make it, there is a real difference. Some of them were absolutely fine. Others seem to have had stunted growth, and other problems like that. And so, I think it just depended on how sick the women were as they were gestating their children, how far advanced the poisoning was.
Right.
And I have to say, all of your people that are attending the play, they are in for such a treat. It is such a beautiful, beautiful script. I'm sure you're going to do it justice and just, have fun, enjoy it. It's such a privilege to tell these women's story, and I think you're doing an amazing thing in putting it on. So thanks for spreading the word about them.
Oh, of course, yeah. I when I read the script, I was like, this story needs to be told.
Well, all I would say is, as I say, go and see the play because it's amazing. You will just have it's so powerful. So go and see it. And I would just say as well, spread the word about the women. They deserve to be remembered and honoured. So if you're chatting down you guys don't really have pubs in America, but if you're in a bar or a coffee shop, talk about this thing that you've heard, talk about the play you've seen, spread the word about them because they're amazing and we all benefit from what they did. So thanks for remembering them.
Yeah.